host is Jennifer.
Hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Jen, Dr. Jen. I'm so excited for you to educate yourself by listening to this podcast in your real estate business and beyond. Many of you know that Michael and I are real estate investors, and many of the quote unquote rules that we're taught in any training program has to do with toxins in a unit. How do you deal with toxins? How do you disclose the toxins? So if a unit was smoked in, or it was a marijuana grow op, or you look at a unit for sale and it has mold in it, what do you do? These are all part of the conversation as a real estate investor. But another part of that conversation is essentially what we as real estate investors call a showstopper, and that's meth. But what happens when the meth comes to you? I'm joined today by an intriguing guest who had her family cabin turned into a meth lab in less than 90 days and basically wrecked it, totally wrecked it, outside of Denver, Colorado. Oh my goodness, Kathi, here to tell us more. Kathi McCarty, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Jen. I really appreciate being here today.
Well, I was contacted by one of your assistants and said, "Hey, this gal has a very unique story about meth." Now, it's such a white hot topic where, everybody in the real estate industry has said, if it's meth, don't touch it, just move on. You don't want to get into it. You bought this family cabin and hired a property management company to put a tenant in it, and then it kind of went sideways from there. Tell us the story.
Right. And to preface that, I bought the cabin and I was living in it with my sons. My daughter had already gone off to college. I was a single mom, and but my two teenage sons. And so this wasn't originally purchased as an investment. It was my sacred space, our sacred space, and ultimately the legacy I intended to leave to my family, the place I wanted to have my grandkids come up one day and, and hang out with grandma and, hike around the area and do all sorts of stuff. So anyway, that being said, life happens. I bought the cabin in 2013. In 2016, early 2016, I experienced a serious health event. I'm here to say I'm nothing but grateful that I have mostly recovered from the initial impact of all that. But when my youngest went off to college in 2017, I decided to temporarily rent out that cabin to offset some medical costs that I had that helped save my sight literally, and to work on my next chapter. I worked over 3 decades as an affiliate in the lending and banking industry in real estate. So I wasn't new to real estate, but I'd never been a realtor, but I own property. Our first home was in 1988 out of state in Southern California, where I came from, and then moved to the foothills west of Denver in Evergreen, Colorado. Purchased a home, but I've even owned a couple of rentals over time, so I wasn't new to it. But when I experienced that health event, and then I decided to rent out the cabin, hiring a management company, putting all of what I thought were the right protections in place, like an endorsement for property, my homeowner's policy to have a tenant, vetting a management company, and doing all those right things, and having conversations for vetting a tenant well beyond what probably a normal person or a traditional person might even know because of my my extensive background in lending. I thought I had taken all the right precautions, and then ultimately it became my worst nightmare when I learned within 90 days of that tenancy, I was contacted by the manager that there was a maintenance issue at the home. It was supposed to be related to minor repairs for water, but they were working on those repairs, and I found out when I went up to the property the next day, those repairs were not minor. It was a major water line break. that's a whole separate Oprah that we can't get into. We don't have time to get into here. But when I wandered around the property with the excavator to look at options for potentially replacing a water line versus repairing an old galvanized pipe that this cabin was from 1956, I discovered equipment behind the home that I could not recognize. It turned
Mhm.
out that this was a THC extraction system, a lot of hoses, buckets, propane tanks. It was a flammable operation back there, along with a butane oven in the inside of the home. But I hadn't even discovered the meth yet. I took pictures that the property manager had from her previous visit, along with what was on the outside to the sheriff's substation. They got a search warrant within less than 2 days, served it, and that's where they found the hardware, the chemicals, the over 802 grams of meth, some other drugs, and a small arsenal of guns. And that's basically when life as I knew it shifted. Yikes, right?
So yeah, yikes. I mean, I'm just trying to digest all of this because as a real estate investor, as a landlord, as whether you're self-managing or you hire a property manager like you did, you obviously you want to provide a home for the tenant, but you also want to protect your asset. And it went sideways so fast. Um, so okay, so you've discovered this, the sheriff has discovered this. Then what? Like, did you call
Yeah.
your insurance company or
Well,
like what
yes.
happened?
Well, I called my insurance company for two reasons. One is the water line break, and
Oh, right.
I had literally just, through the help of my agent, just added an endorsement a week before for that water line. So that's the good news. The bad news is, and I had no idea of this. There are certain exclusions to our traditional policies, even though I had a tenant in there, and one of them is contaminants. And this isn't isolated to just the carrier that I had, but none of the all the major carriers had this exclusion, as well as checking in for years. Literally, I've been doing this. There are no endorsements that you can get for meth contamination, and all of the policies were excluding meth toxin contamination under contaminants, except in very isolated situations. And I'll give you one example. If I was on vacation and nobody was in the property and somebody had broken in and it may fall under vandalism, is what I
Mhm.
was told. Then it would be covered. So I learned that my policy wouldn't help me. But then, of course, the tenant had a policy not just on their contents, but on their them being there on my property, to cover accidents. And what I've been told in the insurance industry is, stupidity. We'll cover stupidity, but they won't cover stupidity when there's a criminal activity, and that's willful and wanton conduct. And that, in this case, was meth manufacturing and usage. And there was an exclusion there. So I was literally on my own with a property, and I had literally 100 huge hurdles that I've still been climbing ever since, even though I don't own the property anymore. But it was a life altering event.
Oh my goodness. So the insurance covered the water main break. That got
Mhm.
repaired, but that was sort of the so was the water main break in the meth
It wasn't.
production, were they related? No.
No, they were not related. I think it was literally, divine intervention with what was going on. Otherwise, he may have just lived there for his year, moved out, and then I found out once I stepped into my home, I couldn't even be in there for a minute without my eyes burning significantly. And I know I have sensitivities. That's part of the permanent damage I have with the health event that I have is to my eyes. And other people could be in the property where my eyes burned really bad, but um, the reality no, they weren't related. The cabin was a 1956 restored cabin. It's an old galvanized pipe. It called me home to discover it because the activities going on behind the property, as even though they weren't related to meth, they were very dangerous. I live in the forest. We had just gotten out of a phase 2 fire ban within our area down to a phase 1, but it was still tinder dry. This is early October, late September of 2018. And we, uh, I'm just really here to say that I am nothing but grateful that nobody else was impacted. My house, as much as maybe the insurance would have covered if it would have blown up and caught in
Right.
fire, it would have put my neighbors and my whole community at risk. And nobody was hurt or worse, and nobody else's property was affected. That's the
Right.
good news.
So the sheriff goes in, they had a search warrant, you're talking to your insurance agent, the water line gets fixed independently of the whole meth thing. I'm assuming that charges were brought up on this tenant for the
hmm
criminal acts that were going on. Did anything get pursued? Did you catch him?
Yes. Yes. The drug task force, our local drug task force team down in the Denver area came up with an arsenal of law enforcement people, and they addressed him. He took off because he wasn't under arrest at the time. They came with a search warrant, but once they found it, he was already gone. They picked him up later that day in the community, and he was arrested on 12 felony counts and
Mhm.
looking at 32 years for what he was doing at the house. But this because nobody was physically harmed, his bail was $5,000 and he was out in 2 days. He was
And gone.
monitored. Well, he was monitored at that point, and he hung in for a while. He was rearrested for violating his bond requirements. They upped it to $10,000. He got out again. He spent almost a year navigating the criminal justice process with a criminal trial that was set for late January of 2020. He was arrested in early October of 2018. So this went on for 15 months, but he stopped showing up and stopped responding probably 2 or 3 months before. So he hung in there for about a year, where I went to a lot of criminal hearings. And sat in on a lot of stuff, and then he was gone. And then they did eventually find him 18 months later on a traffic stop that he was pulled over in a suburb of Denver, where then eventually he went through the hearings and the process again, the criminal process, and he pleaded out on one felony count and got 10 years that he's been serving ever since for that one felony count. And he's eligible for parole a year from today, a year from this month, is my understanding.
Wow.
Now,
So
that did affect some things, including there was a civil process that I had to navigate. Once I put all the pieces together and I got a copy of what I requested was the vetted file from my property manager, I learned that there was only an application there. There was no notes. There was no verified documentation that we had agreed upon. I was told that the income and the cash flow was verified, and there was no credit report even in there. Looking over a credit report that I got later on, weeks later, I would he wasn't even truthful on his application, so he wouldn't have qualified if anything was actually approved. We never were able to determine whether there was a connection, but we looked for it. We found smoke, but we never got to depose him for the civil process due to the fact that he fled, and I wasn't able to delay anything anymore. And basically, I ended up tapping out for pennies on the dollar on a mediated settlement that did not replace the losses that I had to try to regain whether it was my home or another home that just wasn't contaminated with meth, which was that's all I wanted, is just take my home, you fix it up, you do whatever you can, and I'll just go buy something else. And I was met with a lot of resistance uh, uh, through the management company's insurance organization. So it left me houseless and I lost all my equity.
absolutely the worst case scenario that you can think of as a
The,
real
the, per-
estate
the
investor.
perfect storm. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And is in far as that, because I was already dealing with a health event and wasn't able to go back to my career, which I had over 30 years in lending, and at that time banking, running a large commercial bank here in the Denver metro area. So I wasn't new to the processes. I just and sort of the protocols, but I knew everything about this was just bullshit, and it was wrong, and it was still the civil process. It can be an illusion of protection, because not only was I trying to keep I kept my credit fully intact by continuing to pay on my mortgage on a house I couldn't even live in. I also had to pay attorneys for that piece of it, and it was a very exhaustive process when I wasn't even at my job anymore. But I was living on a disability income at that time that I had for my health event. So yeah, it was a perfect storm. But I had to turn, you know, from being a victim, I had a vision, with this also, and that was is not to instill fear, but to empower positive change by, you know, building a platform that could bring awareness, education, and tools and resources. So
Let me ask you one question about the event, and then we'll look forward to what you're
yeah.
doing now, because you're doing some incredible things now. But let's look back at the event. Well, let's look at two aspects of the event. So the first thing that I get asked about and is one of the big questions in the landlord community is about tenant screening,
Hmm.
right? One of the
Right.
most stressful times in a landlord's life is making sure you get the right person in, and the second one is getting the wrong person out. And so the getting the right person in and the tenant screening, it seems that there was some fault or miscommunication, however you want to say it, in the property management and their screening process that let this wrong person in. And so you've gone down that road. You've worked with the property management. It sounds like the insurance as well, exhaustively. It sounds like none of that worked out. The other aspect that I want to look at is how this affected you in you're not well, you're recovering, you're heartbroken because this was the house that you were gonna, raise your grandbabies in. The emotional aspect. I mean, you talked very factually just the first part of this interview as, as the soldier, as the lady holding it up, the alpha woman, the matriarch holding it up.
Yeah.
But that couldn't have possibly been it. I mean,
No.
did this break you? It sounds like it did.
Yeah, well, it did at times. I ebbed and I flowed, and if it weren't for the support, there's if, meth. There's no FEMA for meth. There's no
Right.
organization that you can go to in a disaster where all these nonprofits or social services come with all sorts of things to help guide you, help you with housing. If it weren't for the love and support that I got from close friends and family, specifically my sister, who, I got to live with her and stay with her for a long time and then figure things out over time, and close friends as well. It might have broke me. But I had moments of breakdown. My health event was autoimmune
Mhm.
foundation, so stress is a huge component of it, and there was a lot to do, and there was a lot to research, and I also have these limitations with my sight, especially back then, with the things that I had to go through. So yeah, I can't sugarcoat the impact and
No.
the devastation. I'm not young. I don't have 20 years to rebound. I was on track and within single digits of paying my home off, because I'm going to be 64 here in a month, and I was looking at retiring, being mortgage free, not totally debt free because I still have the maintenance and the taxes and the property insurance. But I worked really hard for, decades to not only provide for my family, and all my kids went to college, and putting all those right pieces in place for my own financial plan. But I lost a third of that, and half my net worth simply by that one event, and now I have to think about housing costs.
Well, a lot of my listeners are real estate investors. If they're landlords,
Mhm.
they're in real estate,
Mhm.
regardless of how they
Sure.
identify themselves, that's what it is. So
Sure.
they're listening to this probably thinking two things: is how can I avoid this nightmare that
Right.
it's, basically a financial reset? And second is that if we end up buying a home that has meth in it or was manufactured or was
Mhm.
smoked in it, because you've mentioned that that's a problem as well, is that meth is getting smoked all over the place.
Right.
What then? How do you avoid it, and what do you do if you got one?
Sure. There's, I can teach I teach a class on it, right, and workshops on it. So to professionals and civic organizations and professionals in the industry, and then just like you said, investors. So I understand there's a lot to it, but there are pieces in place. I also want to really impress upon the fact there's a lot of great property management companies out there. There may not be this formal standard of care out there, but there are fiduciary responsibilities and protocols that need to be followed, and communication is key. And the one thing, if I've learned in this legal process, is if you had a conversation with somebody at any professional level, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So I did have a lot of verbal conversations that never took place, and ultimately never happened when it came to vetting this tenant, even though I was assured it all happened. And I wanted to even review those documents for cash flow and capacity and all that, because that's my love language, right? and but that being said, it didn't happen. And but but having clear communication, if you're managing your own property, all the responsibility falls on you. uh, re re renewing leases without having people reapply is not. I've talked to, interviewed dozens of people, and in legal capacities and whatnot. But go have those conversations with those advisors that really know what it's like at the other end, at the civil litigation process. But you got to put it in writing. You have to have clear conversations. And if somebody else is managing your property for you, my personal advice is I gave away my power. I gave away the keys, and I let somebody else make the full decision on who is going to be in my property. And I don't know that that's necessarily, it may be a standard practice, but I don't know that it's a best practice anymore, because nobody will ultimately care about your property, even if you've never lived in it before, other than you, because you're ultimately responsible for whatever happens there, financially and otherwise. So it's important to be part of that decision making process and put that in writing, put it in your management agreements. But if you're the investor and you're managing your own properties, or even to know about this for your primary residence, there's certain things you should know about the people, that are in your property or that are coming or going, and you should have sort of standards that you set, and the workers that come into your property, because manufacturing is not as common as it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. But methamphetamine is being made cheaper, stronger. For the states here, it's usually out of Mexico, through the cartel. I'm not here to focus in on that at all, or the user. That's way out of my pay grade. I'm just here to let people know that there is a real component and a real health effect and a financial impact from the smoke, from the toxins that are released when one sits and smokes meth by using it either recreationally or through an addiction. Uh, Either or. You could smoke one time in a bedroom, a small bedroom, and exceed the standards for methamphetamine in some of the states that actually have standards by just smoking it in a bedroom. So, and a larger room like this, it may take a party, but it can happen. And ultimately, you can't see it, you can't smell it necessarily. It's invisible, and it's something worth looking into. And if you're looking to buy property in the future, is to test any property before you buy.
Well, I think that's where we come down to it, is there is an ethics side of disclosing as a seller what you know about a property and the history of the property, including it, any meth testing or any history or encapsulation of meth in the walls, or even asbestos, not just meth, other toxins
Mhm.
as well.
Right.
But then there is also part of that due diligence, when you're in the period where you've got an accepted offer, you're looking for your lending, you're looking with all your inspectors, it should become standard practice to test for meth, which is it's becoming more and more prevalent, from what I'm hearing, and especially talking to folks like you, Kathy. I'm just aghast, going, as a real estate investor, how do I avoid this? And is testing the end all be all?
Right. And as good as testing is, and let's just start with the fact that of the 50 states that we have, only half of them have any standards, regulations, and or legislation around meth toxins. So there's a whole 25 states that don't even have any at all.
Mm,
So they're not even looking at it if it were to come up.
right.
Um, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect your health or the financial impact if meth has been consumed or been manufactured in a property that's in a state that that has it. Hawaii. There, real briefly, there's. I mean, I don't mean to segue, but there's a really good, couple really good programs on the National Geographic Channel. One's called Drugs Inc., and the other one is called Trafficked. Past
Mhm,
tense, trafficked, with Maria Van Zeller, and there's it's everywhere, and she goes into Mexico and follows the cartel in these super lab sites and things like that. It's fascinating when you look at that, but it's real, and so I suggest people check that out. That being said, you're absolutely right. The 12 or the 25 states that um, have regulations on them, there's only 6 of the 25 that have any requirements built into their legislation or regulations that you need to disclose past contamination after it's been remediated to that state standard. Only
mhm.
6. And even though there's 6 of them, those 6, there could be some loopholes that I can't address because it's, again, way past my pay grade with trying to read
Sure.
some of that legal jargon that I have. That means uh, there's 19 states that have no regulations at all for requiring you to disclose it after remediation, and that's scary. So, in the case of my home was sold after I sold it fully disclosed, fully contaminated, because I was told I had 7 different remediation companies up there, and they were all willing to try, but they got to get paid to try, but none of them could guarantee their work.
Right.
They just couldn't guarantee it. The levels were too high. The standard here is point 0.5, and 9 of the 11 zones that they tested were between 69 and 119.5. And so that's, let's just start there. So, and it was wood. It was a log home, so it wasn't like where here now, where if it was contaminated, you could take the drywall out and take the flooring out and take a property down to the studs if you had severe contamination. I had log beams. There was no drywall,
Right.
that on the outer walls. I had a couple interior walls, and that was it. So, you have the logistics of the porous material. That being said, the people that bought it from me, uh, they weren't sure that they could be successful. What they were able to do is encapsulate the meth after they could not get it to pass. They got the numbers down, but they weren't able to get it to pass, and they
Mm,
were able to seal the meth in with a approved product with our State Department that allowed them to seal it in, and then they sold it 5.5 months after they bought it from me for more than double what they paid for it, for almost $300,000 more.
mm.
So I know there was a cost for them to do it, but they still got pretty much all my equity as well. So in
Wow.
5.5 months. And so did the new people know about it? I don't know. You'd have to sort of peel back the layers of the sales process and the history of that property. But the reality is if your health department, the state is telling you that it's safe. Most people, especially at the time that that property sold, which was 2020, it sold September of 2020 to new people. People were waiving property inspections because the values were just skyrocketing, and they just wanted to get into a home, and visually it looked like a cream puff. It was an adorable cabin from the outside, but it had a secret on the inside, and a very dangerous secret. So I just believe, there's a moral compass here. But more importantly, I also believe too that if it's so safe, if our health departments are saying that the property's safe, then why not require disclosure and let people make informed decisions, do their due diligence, which means being able to maybe have somebody come in and do a meth test, a new meth test, because the testing, as good as it is, it's only samples of full square footage. It's only samples of one wall. It's about a 4-inch square on one wall, and you might take 4 samples in a room, but it's not the whole room. It's not all the
Right.
ceiling, and it's not all the floor. So it is somewhat subjective, and give people an opportunity to, um, like you said, come in and do those normal tests, but then make this new test part of your due diligence, to understand what your risk tolerances may be, and understand and make informed decisions.
For sure. Well, you and I, we talked about the ethics of, avoiding purchasing a home or a unit without contaminants in it at all,
Hmm.
meth included. And so we can test. There's disclosure. There's an argument about the ethics of all that and encapsulation. There's an argument of that. But let's say that as a real estate investor, Mike and I buy a house or an apartment block, and we've tested it. It was fine. We bought it. Our tenants are good. But then we suspect that people are smoking meth in the units or even in the common areas. What about like a meth detector, like a smoke detector? Is there such a thing?
Yes, I came out of the shock of my situation thinking the same thing. If I would have had something in there, would that have made a difference, like a carbon monoxide detector or something like that? And I did find something back then, but it was very basic back then. It didn't do the things that I wanted it to do, because if an alarm goes off and somebody's using, they're just going to hit it with a hammer, and that won't help you. But I wanted something that would maybe alert you on a cell phone, on a smartphone. And there is. So I was working on that with somebody I knew here in Colorado, an aerospace engineer. Got to a provisional patent on a meth alarm, and then the pandemic hit, and my funding opportunities dried up for a while. But I continued to follow the guy that was out on the other side of the world, and he continued to improve it to the point where there is a meth alarm that he developed. It's a smart alarm, so it comes with the ability to track, depending upon how you set up these sensors, to every sniffing for every 30 minutes to up to every 2 hours, and it'll track it on a software portal.
Hmm.
So if you have a tenant in there, you can you can clear a home before they move in, that, hey, we had it tested for meth, and it's clean to the best of our ability. And now all of a sudden the alarm goes off, and you've got it that it was tracking that there was some sort of contamination. Could have been cross contamination because you were hanging out at a family member's home, and it got on your clothes, and it's low levels, and the sensors were picking it up, maybe. But probably it's hard to say that it would always do that, but if there was usage, it would pick it up right away. And so
Hmm.
I'm very proud that, as part of my platform for prevention and protection, one of the resources is to help represent this and get this out there to property owners. Because for me, if I would have been able to buy one of these, I would have advertised that the meth alarm was in the property, and then a guy
As a
like that would have
deterrent.
never yeah, a guy like that would have just gone on to some other place, or he would have rented somebody's VRBO for, 2 weeks, but he was gonna, he set up shop obviously in my
Yeah.
place. But those things are very common, where people go into motel rooms and rent for a few days, or Airbnbs or VRBOs. I'm not, like I've said, I'm just here to wake people up to what's available to them.
Are the meth detectors, are they expensive?
They're not. Currently, they're being offered at $599. It's no different if and through my website, they're helping me get this word out there, and offering it with a little bit of a discount, just by going through my website and the code, so it doesn't cost you any more. And $599 for the actual alarm, and then to manage the portal, which is ongoing, it's under $300 a year, so that's less than $25 a month.
Yeah.
As a business owner, and my ROI, my return on investment, again, let's just do the math. That's nothing, because you should check with your CPA or the tax people on whether you could write that off as another business expense for your rental. But
Right.
I think it's a type of insurance that you can't get right now because you can't get an endorsement. You may be able to get it for a commercial property, and nobody's I'm looking to hopefully see if anybody will any insurance organization. So if you're listening out there, call me, let's collaborate. But I think if as far as if this alarm was in a residential property, but you still got to establish a baseline that the property was clean before that person was in there, because is as much as we found all this evidence and over 800 grams of meth and all of the manufacturing material. I had to sit in a deposition, Dr. Jen, where uh, uh, the deposer said to me, "Well, Miss McCarty, did you have your home tested when you bought it?" And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
"No, I didn't even know I needed to do that. I didn't even know it was a thing, and I'm in lending." And he goes, "Well, how do you know it wasn't already contaminated?"
Well,
And so yeah, my psycho was kicking in, but I I was on camera, so I had to compose
oh,
myself. I know what I wanted to say, right?
yeah, no,
But
I understand. I absolutely understand. Well, tell us more about your courses. Obviously, you have gone through this huge roller coaster of an experience and the criminal aspect, the civil aspect, insurance, way more about toxins than you ever thought you would know, especially in your former underwriting days and all the things you did in lending. Where tell us about your courses that you
sure.
offer, which is all about toxins.
Sure. Being a lender, I started with my industry of lending. I went to organizations that focus with lenders, and I'm like, "Did you guys ever hear about this?" And a couple of them had, and a couple of them hadn't. A couple of them had buyers that ended up buying homes that had major impacts, and they have supported me by getting me in front of audiences. So that's been great, workshops and things like that. But I decided to develop a continuing education course that's approved here in Colorado. Through our Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA's Division of Real Estate, which holds the licenses for realtors and property managers. And during the pandemic, I I helped facilitate classes with the meth alarm or the meth testing people that had a CE course. And as good as they were, we presented it in front of over 500 realtors and affiliates online during the pandemic over a year. We hosted 12 courses, but there was a lot missing after what I experienced that I wanted to bring to the table, so to speak. Like insurance doesn't cover it. How do you prevent it? Those guys were there to help you once it happened, but what can you do to prevent it? So I worked with an instructional designer in adult learning education with over 30 years experience that she had to develop a course that would fill in a lot of these other blanks for prevention and have those tough conversations where it's going to talk about things that I learned from the experts that mention that it's more prevalent, that 25 to 50% of the homes that are being tested are coming up positive with some level of meth contamination that requires the next level of testing, which is called a preliminary. Maybe it's exhaust fans in a bathroom that need to be changed out, but if that exhaust fan is not vented to the outside and it's vented into another area of the home, they're recirculating that meth around. And I say that because it happened to an 86-year-old friend of mine, where his in-home healthcare person was staying with him, and that's what she was doing downstairs, was smoking meth, and the exhaust fan was vented to the furnace room unknowingly. And so when the furnace was on during most of the Colorado winters, obviously all during the winters and whatnot. Yeah, it took over a year to get that one clean to be able to sell and whatnot.
Ugh,
So there's plenty of stories that we could talk about, and I'm not here to scare anybody. I'm just here to say that there's a way to really do your due diligence and put some provisions in place up front to protect it.
yeah.
So yeah.
If the listener's interested in contacting you, how do they get a hold of you?
I think I'm all over social media. I have a LinkedIn profile, Kathy with my name with a K and an I. That's how mom did it. And as well as the website, which I think you'll have out there, methtoxinsalliance.com. I have a YouTube channel with a lot of different interviews that we did. I've done them with law enforcement and testers and insurance people and even people who are fell prey to, like I did, people that had health impacts when they lived adjoining and through transfer, and all sorts of people and conversations that I've had. And so I welcome a conversation. I can turn my CE class into a workshop for any professional organization, and there's plenty of them. I think financial planners, the wellness space, investors, HOAs. I'm happy to do things via Zoom or come out in person. There's plenty of organizations and industries that support victims of crimes and the drug impact space, drug rehabs. These are perfect alarms. Where I just placed one, a dozen of them in a facility that serves victims of domestic violence. But unfortunately, victims are also potential, can be users too. And this particular facility had already had three previous separate impacts of meth toxins that cost their nonprofit over $50,000
Mm.
aggregately. And so they purchased some alarms to put in each room where individuals and sometimes families live, so they could pinpoint where maybe the origin started, but also letting them know that their residences had them, so maybe the people that do use would just use it outside and not put other residences as well as the employees at risk, where they have to come in and continue to clean. They've done that multiple times. So there's a real issue going out here, as we know, an epidemic use. You cannot profile a property. You can't profile a neighborhood or a community. It's not just those low income, high crime, inner city, traditional stereotypes that we were used to back then. It's anywhere and everywhere, locally, nationally, and even globally. If you Google it, it's all over. So
That's so sobering to me,
it is.
Kathy. And I know you're in Denver, and we're talking, some continuing education courses. My listeners are honestly they're global. I've got most of my listeners are in the U.S., but many
Hmm.
listeners are also in Canada, Vancouver,
Right.
Toronto. And this is not a U.S. thing. This is
No.
a human thing at this point, and it's unfortunately becoming even more prevalent. So I'm super happy to have you on the show. Quite frankly, you frightened the crap out of me, and I've got to talk to Mike and go. Maybe we need to consider putting, meth detectors in some of our properties, both in the U.S. and Canada, because if this is as prevalent as you're educating us, then what's the likelihood that some of my properties have meth in them? Probably higher than I want to realize, that I
Right.
actually want to say out loud. And I don't want to have a loss just like you did. And I really appreciate you coming on and explaining, this is raw. This is really raw. And you've taken it by the horns, and here you are turning it around and educating people on how to avoid it. And I applaud you. Seriously, this is a big topic.
Well, I appreciate that. I feel that it was tough. I don't want to be a victim here, but
Yeah.
having a vision to turn these lemons, real bad lemons, into learning and legislation. So here in Colorado, we were able to get some legislation passed, but we weren't able to meet, the large organizations that oppose requiring it to disclose it even after remediation, yet. But I'm not stopping there. So it depends upon which side of the table you sit on, and there is a moral compass. But ultimately, once you learn that there's an issue, as I believe you might have mentioned earlier, once you know that there may have been an issue, you can't sweep it under the rugs. There's this responsibility that could come back to affect future tenants, future occupants,
Yep.
future service providers, and anybody and everybody that that could come back to affect you. So I implore people to evaluate their moral compass and do put some provisions in place, and then try to avoid it altogether and have those users go somewhere else if possible. But to take this really very seriously, and
Yeah.
like you mentioned about the class, we can look at maybe doing something to your listeners with a workshop, a collaborative workshop online together, or something like that, and hitting your audiences where they can learn a little bit more detail. And maybe I can even get some experts to join us that can
Sure.
talk from a general standpoint about things that could affect them personally as well.
Yeah, you bet. And that's the whole idea is that there's so many seasoned real estate investors out there that maybe think that they've learned every lesson there is, and while their lesson book is quite long, everything
Hmm.
starts to change, and there's even more new real estate investors coming in going, how do I do this right? And honestly, a lot of them are fumbling through it, which is why they're coming to podcasts and YouTube and Facebook trying to educate themselves. This is such a deal breaking topic, though, that you really have got to educate yourself way deeper than I ever thought, which is one of the reasons I wanted you on the show as a guest. I
I
appreciate
appreciate
you
that.
being with us today, truly, Kathy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I just wanna summarize it with one thing, because you mentioned, like I saw this property, not only as my home and our sacred space. I wanted to have my grandchildren there one day, and now I do have a grandchild, and another one on the way. And I look to the vision of this is much bigger than me, but I also know that when we lead with integrity, it doesn't affect just us here today. A lot of your listeners may have a portfolio that they intend to leave as a legacy to their children and their families. But when we lead with integrity, we have a profound impact, literally, for generations to come. And I just wanted to, end on that positive note where people can just sort of think about that from a heart centered point.
Absolutely. Well done. We'll leave it there. Hang on
Okay,
just a sec.
thank you.
Okay.